Hey Lukey, how are you, mate?
Very good, mate. How are you going?
I'm good. I'm good. Um, just down here in Melbourne, working my little bum off.
Yeah,
What have you been up to?
yeah, pretty much the same, man. There's always a lot of stuff going on, especially putting together all the education stuff. So, that's how it is.
Yeah, awesome. You seems like everything's going really well.
Yeah, it's busy, which is awesome, man.
It's good, man. It's good to see. Cool. So obviously the reason we're on a call today is where we're going to go through your modules for the transformation group blueprint that we've put together.
Hmm.
Um, the principles you were covering was we were going through nutrition and physiology and basically the role it plays in body composition and physique transformation.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so we've only got about 20 minutes, but what I want to start on before we jump into any of the principles, do you just want to give us an overview of, I guess, why it's so important?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, obviously, when you're doing a transformation, there's a lot that's going on with people's physiology, and we want to do the right thing, right? We don't want to crash diet them. We don't want to cause any issues where they're sort of coming out the other end and feeling terrible as a result of it. Um, and obviously part of the transformation side of things is the nutrition and the physiology is really what gets the result. Like, yes, you do need to train. That is very important. But at the end of the day, unless you're matching that up with nutrition and some of the lifestyle stuff, you're really just not going to get a great result. And it's the client's going to feel terrible. So, at the end of the day, if a client's not feeling very good, like it's not a good experience for them. And then it reflects badly on you. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, like that last bit especially, I think it's we've touched on it literally with everyone I've spoke to, but when it comes down to it, right, it's all about the client experience, and
mm,
in regards to business, right, which most of the people who are watching this is what they're going to be trying, they're going to be applying all this info to their clients to grow their business.
mm,
Um, it's super important, right, that you give them the best client experience, so then the compounding effect of that and the ripple effect as well is that it reflects positively on your business. Cool. So we're going to launch into this first principle, right? And the first one that you've written here is the ratio of carbs and fats doesn't matter that much. Adequate protein and calorie deficit is number one, and the rest is in the details.
yeah, totally. So, look, fundamentally, what we're trying to do with the nutrition is we're trying to create a calorie deficit. We're trying to give them enough protein so that they are maintaining muscle mass and they're losing that weight from fat mass, right?
Yep.
Now, does nutrient timing matter? Yes. Does the ratio of carbs and fats matter? Will that make a difference? Yes. The number of meals you have each day and the supplements you take? Yes. And yes. But without those two key things, the calorie deficit and adequate protein, you're basically in no man's land and you're not going to get a good result. So, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that that is ticked off as a matter of course. Otherwise, your transformation is not going to happen. So for me, that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's the stuff that you need to focus on first. Those are the big rocks that you can deal with first. And it also comes into a client preference thing. Like if you have someone come in and they are very, very busy at work and they physically cannot eat 6 times a day, it's pointless trying to write them a program that has 6 meals a day. And at the end of the day, like that sort of meal frequency is going to get you maybe an extra like 3 to 5% in the big picture. As long as you can generate a deficit with adequate protein, it doesn't matter that much how many meals a day they eat. The point is just that they do generate that calorie deficit and eat enough protein. So it's like trying to figure in those basic big rocks that are going to get you 80% of the results, but making sure that the client is 100% doing it and 100% compliant and on board with you doing it. And that's why it's so important, right?
100%. Makes sense, man. I think we've kind of touched on this with a few other of the experts as well, right? It's like there's always going to be variables that you can play with to get people, that extra 10%.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, right, you've got to get the basics right. And I think what we're starting, a lot of the kind of principles that are overlaying is stress management and getting people into a calorie deficit. Um, and there's obviously a lot of ways that you can do that as well.
Definitely.
Cool. So principle two, sleep is super important. So kind of rolling off what we just said, stress management and recovery
Yeah.
and these things. Do you just want to elaborate on, I guess, why it's so important and maybe some of the, I guess, the the principles within the principle?
Yeah, definitely. So sleep is pretty much something that affects everything in your physiology. You know, if you feel like, oh, I'm a bit stressed, I'm a bit overweight, I'm not growing enough muscle, I feel under recovered, I get sick easily, my memory sucks, whatever it is, you can guarantee that sleep plays an important role in that. It's really, really important. So it's a really important part of all of those factors that go into making a successful transformation. So from the first most basic perspective, there's been multiple studies now showing that if you have two groups of people eating the same number of calories, doing the same training, the group that sleeps more is going to lose more of their body weight from fat and less of it from lean mass. So straight away, if your client is not sleeping properly, you're at a disadvantage because they're much more likely to lose lean mass, even if you are giving them adequate protein and they're training really well. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that getting enough sleep is really important for things like mood and cravings and hunger. So if your client is not sleeping very well, then their cravings are going to go up. If they're not sleeping very well, their mood is going to be worse, which means they're more likely to go, fuck this, and like have a really bad day and stuff up the training plan. So to keep that calorie deficit and the adequate protein that we spoke about in the previous principle, getting enough sleep really helps facilitate that because it affects things like mood, hunger, cravings, all of that kind of stuff. So, all of that's really, really important from the dieting side of things. But then the final piece of the puzzle is that, you are going to be training at the same time as well. And sleep is a massive part of recovery, obviously. So if you're not sleeping well enough, it's more likely that the client is going to get injured, have little niggles, be unable to complete the training volume that they need to complete. And at the end of the day, if your client is injured and they're unable to train, that's going to put a massive spanner in the works when you're trying to get a transformation on a limited time frame.
Yeah, cool. So I think something that popped up, like we obviously had a chat before this, and I was telling you about last week how I was running off 2 hours sleep. Not sure how it happened, not sure why it happened. I just needed to get a few things done. But a little case study about and kind of on myself was last week I was doing deficit deadlifts as a part of my program. I hit 175 for 6 comfortably. And then I went to do deadlifts on Tuesday and I was deadlifting off the ground. And I literally was struggling to hit 170 for 6. Like I was like grinding it out. So
yeah, there you go.
In a matter of 5 days, I've kind of, we can't really put a percentage of it on it because it's different movements. But deadlifting off the ground should be a lot easier than deadlifting from a deficit. And I was actually lifting less and struggling more. So
yeah, 100%.
We touched on some stuff with James about the nervous system and these types of things. And I think, one of the things that I'm trying to get across with what we're putting this together is a lot of these things, these different subtopics that you have within a transformation all actually cross over and tie into each other. So we talked to Jordan Shallow on Monday about performance and its role in body composition. And I think, again, it ties in with what you were just saying, right? Like that last point is if you can't perform because you're not sleeping properly, right? Not just output, but from a physiological point of view as well, right? It's going to be affected.
Yeah, 100%. It's massive, man. And like everybody knows that, right? But I think sometimes like you had that issue of, okay, it was 2 hours of sleep. That's pretty bad, right? Like you notice that straight away. But for the average person who might be like missing out on an hour of sleep a night and just creating that ongoing chronic sleep debt, they often don't even realize because they're just not used to getting enough sleep. So trying to maximize that for them. And by the time they've spent a week or two sleeping like properly and they get rid of that sleep debt, it's like all of a sudden performance goes up and it's easier to stick to the diet and they're losing more body fat, and it's just a case of like a little tweak of getting into a good routine can make a massive, massive difference because it flows onto everything.
Crazy, man. Like I constantly always like to clients also, how do you, like the first thing I say to them is like, oh, so how are you sleeping? And everyone's like, yeah, good. Like,
so they think.
When you ask them another 3 questions, like diving into how their sleep is, and you realize that their sleep shit house.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So we're going to go into the next one, and the next one is cortisol and stress can mask your progress.
Yeah, totally. And, in more ways than one, but the one I had in particular is to do with how you look visually and water retention. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of the guys would have mentioned stress and how it affects things like diet and compliance and how easy it is to lose body fat and all that kind of stuff. But basically what happens is as you're training harder, as your dieting period goes on longer, so it's got a time frame to it, it's got a time dimension, and it's also got a quantity dimension or a size dimension. So, a bigger deficit will cause more of a stress response, and a longer deficit, or the longer it goes on, the more stress response you produce. You start producing more and more cortisol. And so this accumulated stress of training and the low incoming energy because you're in a deficit causes these stress levels to rise. It causes your cortisol to rise. And you might notice that when you get really stressed out, when you have a really high calorie day, often you'll actually wake up and look better the next day. So sometimes if people have like a cheat meal on the weekend, they eat it and they go, holy shit, I just dropped all this body fat on the weekend. And that's not actually what happened. What's happened is you've lost a bunch of water that's been accumulating in the subcutaneous layer underneath your skin, in the same spot where your fat is, but it's not actually body fat, it's water. And the reason that works like that is because there's another hormone called aldosterone, and aldosterone is basically what helps manage your water retention. Now, cortisol is structurally really, really similar to aldosterone. So if you have a lot of cortisol, it can actually interact with the aldosterone receptor. It can lock in there and signal just as if it was aldosterone, and that causes you to retain water. So as soon as we use any strategy to reduce stress, we get this whoosh effect where you drop all of the water from underneath the skin, and then all of a sudden, like, holy shit, I can see my abs now. So, I think it's worth noting that stress and cortisol is part of the process. It's going to happen no matter what, because training is a stressor no matter what. Dieting is a stressor no matter what. But understanding that taking some specific steps to drop cortisol can make you look like a wizard in the client's eyes. So giving them something like a higher calorie day, giving them some specific stress management techniques, whether that's telling them, all right, you got the weekend off to go out and have some fun, whatever it is, that can really make a massive difference in how the client looks and feels. And it can make you, like I said, it can make you look like a wizard if they suddenly drop all of this water and then they look a lot better the next day.
Yeah, for sure. Really interesting. It's a really interesting concept about not just it being as easy as like taking a supplement or something like that to drop cortisol, like obviously to make that happen. I think by simply changing their perception or their mindset to de-stress and do things like that, I think it's something that can be overlooked, right? Like,
yeah,
a lot of the time when you're giving someone a refeed, there's a psychological benefit to that, which again has the ripple effect and will affect other processes as well.
I think that's really important. The point you made just before we go on to the next one is because stress is perceptual. Like, so some people really like doing certain activities and other people hate it. And so for some people, those activities are going to be stressful, and for other people, it's going to be enjoyable and it's going to drop their stress. So like some people hate going on a hike and other people are going to love it, right? So maybe you have to know your client and understand what switches them on and what they like doing, and then be clever about how you prescribe things like that to help them out.
Another like, just to add on to that again, is like, this could be and what you just said could be the difference between someone getting lean and somebody not.
Yeah, totally.
For instance, right, like, how do we create a calorie deficit? A lot of the time it can be from either decreasing intake or increasing output. For instance, I've got a guy at the moment, I'm prepping for a show in 4 weeks' time. A lot of he struggles when the food gets taken away, and especially carbohydrates, right? So, we keep carbohydrates in as long as we can. We get a lot of his, cardio, we got him doing an hour a day now, just so his food stays up as high as possible for that exact reason. I do not want to stress this guy out. And I know that previously he hasn't reacted well to me taking food away. And the great thing is we've still got food in there, right? So based on what we just talked about, that's kind of a decision that I've made, and it's almost like a good case study, right? Like
100%.
But yeah, so we'll go into the next one. Metabolic adaptation will occur, but it's a normal response to dieting.
Yeah, so this is a really hot topic at the moment, and I get like dozens of questions a day about this on my social media. But metabolic adaptation is essentially when you start dieting, your brain recognizes that it is not getting as much energy coming in. And so what it tries to do is reduce the amount of calories that you're spending every day. And it does that by making you a little bit more efficient muscularly. So the same activities actually cost a bit less energy now. It does it by making you less likely to stand up and walk around and more likely to lean on things, to not fidget, to sit still, to just lay on the couch instead of getting up. And so all of this basically slows down how much energy you're putting out every day. And that can make up for quite a significant amount of calories. So you might give someone a 500 calorie deficit, and because of this metabolic adaptation that's happening from the brain, you might only have, it might reduce your output by like 200 or 300 calories a day, and now your deficit is way smaller than you thought. The client's getting less food, and weight is not coming off as fast as you'd hoped because your deficit's actually now smaller than you thought it would be. So that's a big issue. Now, that's a normal response to dieting. That is a survival mechanism that basically has ensured that the human race is still here today, and it occurs across all animals. But it does mean that we can take some steps to combat that. It means that as we lose weight and the longer we go on, it's going to be harder and harder to keep generating a deficit. And the main way we can ensure that our output stays high is by making sure that our non-exercise activity is high, which is our next point. But yeah, the main point I want to get into here is that it is normal for metabolic adaptation to occur, and it's not going to permanently damage your metabolism. So a lot of people think there is metabolic damage and you have to use all of these fancy dieting strategies to stop that from occurring. And the reality is, if you're in a deficit and you're losing weight, your metabolic rate is going to go down. That's just how it is. But it comes right back up again when you go back to maintenance. So it's not a permanent change. It's going to come back. It's just something that you have to deal with. You have to be aware of it as a coach, essentially.
Yeah, cool. So I think that was really, I was going to say, I think I could kind of tell that these 2 points would have been linked very, very heavily. But what are the ways you combat something like this, right? So like, obviously when we talk about controlling variables in regards to what you were talking about, obviously NEAT is that thing that most people are starting to get accustomed to. Yeah, like most people are tracking their NEAT. It's a really good way to make sure your client's still getting their activity in. But what are the I guess the tools that you can use to combat something like this?
Yeah, the main thing is essentially having periods where, now for a 12-week transformation, this might not be as applicable, but having periods where you do bring calories back up to maintenance again. And we usually call that a diet break. So you might take a week where you bring calories back up to maintenance, you allow the metabolism to come back up again, and then you go into another dieting phase. And that might be appropriate for some people. During a 12-week transformation, you might be able to put one of those in the middle, right? The other thing is really just making sure that, like, the biggest part of metabolism that is variable is the activity. So for me, I prefer having higher levels of activity, higher levels of training, and giving the client more food, like you alluded to before, rather than taking heaps of food away, having them move less and less and less and less, and then they end up on like hardly any calories, their metabolism's down in the toilet, and they feel like shit all the time because they can't eat anything. So, for me, it's much better to try and keep them on as many calories as you can, but make them move as often as is feasible for the client. And, I said before that the ratio of carbs and fats doesn't matter that much, and it doesn't. But if you really wanted to make the most of this, most people actually get a much better metabolic response from eating more carbohydrate. Now, that's not everybody, but most people in general will do better on a higher carbohydrate diet in this. And usually when I bring people back up for a maintenance phase, most of those extra calories coming in out of their deficit is from carbohydrate. Because it seems to have a more robust hormonal response in bringing them back up.
How does something like a refeed factor into this?
Refeeds can be helpful, but the issue with the refeed is that it is not a long enough period of time for the brain to go, oh yeah, we're not out of starvation at the moment. So if you think about it, like your brain's thinking, oh shit, we're running out of food and we're starving to death over a period of like 6 weeks, it's not going to take one meal, like a cheat meal, or even one day to bring it out of that mode and think, oh, we're out of the woods now, we're all clear. In my experience, it's going to take at least probably 3 to 5 days to see any hormonal response. And I prefer a minimum of a week if we're going to go that route of, bringing back up to maintenance. So my diet break periods are minimum 1 week. Sometimes they go 2 weeks, but it depends how much time you have to work with the client. Because if you're giving them 2-week diet breaks all the time, that energy still has to come off at some point. So like it's just going to extend your dieting period out. Now, it might make the dieting period easier for them to manage because you're breaking it up into these chunks and keeping the metabolism high. But at the same time, it's also going to take much longer because you still have to diet that energy off at some point.
Yeah, really interesting. Really, I'm almost like, I kind of knew that obviously refeeds are in there for other purposes as well, but I've got this kind of thing in my head where I'm like, well, we talk about perception again, and the placebo effect of a refeed is like,
and that's the biggest thing. So there's a separate aspect to it. So that's all physiological. Now the psychological aspect, that's a different thing, right? So some people really like having like a refeed day at the end of the week or at the start of the week because psychologically it helps them so much. It decreases their stress. It gives them a little bit more fuel and they feel like they can train harder. They can move more. So, there is a psychological aspect to it. So as the coach, that's up to you to work out what is going to get this client where they need to be. What is their personality? What motivates them? So for me, using a cheat meal personally, I actually don't like it personally. So if I had a coach and he gave me a cheat meal, I'd be like, hey, can we just not do the cheat meal? Because it actually stuffs me up. I like having every day the same. But other people love it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's it comes down to as a coach, right? You've got a responsibility to actually coach someone, and I think this is a really important topic, right? Like, you need to have the ability to understand the physiological principles on a deeper level, so that you can make the right decisions and coach someone rather than just be so robotic.
I agree.
I think when you understand the physiological principles on a deeper level, you can start to work with the psychological principles on the back end of that.
Definitely.
So that's something that I like to do with clients. Is like, all right, well, physiological, is it going to get me a benefit? Maybe not, but psychologically, could it give me a benefit? And like give this person what they think is the upper edge on say like the and especially like comp preps, right? Like, it may be more down this side of it where someone's really hurting and you got to give them some little type of something to look forward to, something that gives them the perception that they've got more energy, whatever it is, right? But again, it comes back down to having that deeper understanding. Cool, man. We're going to wrap it up there. Again, always good to chat, man. I feel like we always have some good discussions, and I think the stuff that you're putting out there at the moment is really, really awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks at the Mastery and seeing another awesome presentation. But even just the stuff we've had a chat about today and within the blueprint, always dropping knowledge bombs, man. So thanks for your time, and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Awesome, brother. Thanks heaps.